Hello and welcome to Ellroy Reads. This is the premium book show on YouTube and the internet itself. It is the book show without gimmicks, without special effects, without distractions, with nothing like that at all. It's just me in a chair talking about great books. What more do you need? Okay, so if you're unfamiliar with Ellroy Reads, this is a show where every week I look at a book that was influential to James Ellroy, a book that inspired him in some way. And today's book is Two of a Kind, The Hillside Stranglers by Darcy O'Brien. Okay, so a little bit of background. Darcy O'Brien was born in Oklahoma and educated at the universities of Princeton and Berkeley. He was an academic and he published literary criticism. He had a very diverse writing career. He published autobiographical novels that were well received. His debut novel won the PEN/Hemingway Award for Most Promising Debut. And then with Two of a Kind, he moved into the true crime genre, and sometimes referred to, depending on the context, as the nonfiction novel. And this brought him a whole new level of success. It's really a genre he excelled in, and I think Two of a Kind, well, the books that he later produced, like The Power of Hurt, about the sexual abuse by Judge David Lanier. But I think Two of a Kind, about the Hillside Stranglers, is his masterpiece. Okay, so the Hillside Stranglers were two cousins, Angelo Buono, the older one, and Kenneth Bianchi, the younger, much more submissive one, who were both born in Rochester, New York State, and moved to LA. Bianchi was very, very troubled. His mother was a prostitute. He was constantly in trouble. He was seeing psychiatrists at a very young age, did very badly at school. And he moved in with Buono, who was living in Los Angeles. They lived together at the time and they killed together. They were both sexual sadists, and their basic MO was that they pretended to be policemen. They had the badge, they had the red light, and they would pull women over, and they would bring them in, and they would sexually torture them. The details are horrific. Sodomy, strangulation. They were really, really bad, sick, twisted people. They murdered 10 women together, and November 1977 was probably one of the biggest times of panic in Los Angeles history, since worse than the Black Dahlia murder of 1947, because they killed most of their victims in November of 1977 and Thanksgiving season. And it was a time of absolute panic. How they came undone is that Bianchi moved to Washington State and he murdered two women there, but he didn't have the cunning or the manipulative power of Angelo Buono, and he left a lot of clues. So he was apprehended straight away, and he immediately flipped. He agreed to testify against Buono. So Buono was arrested in Los Angeles, and his trial turned into one of the longest criminal trials in Los Angeles history. In fact, in American history, it dragged on for 2 years because there was very little forensic evidence against them. They became known as the Hillside Stranglers because they would leave their victims at hillsides, which dotted around LA. They took very good advantage of the LA freeway system, where they could get in and out of areas very, very quickly without leaving witnesses, without leaving clues. And because there was little scientific evidence at the time, of course, this was before DNA profiling, and not to mention there were nowhere near as many CCTV cameras as before, cell site technology as before, GPS technology in cars, all of these tricks which the police have up their sleeve now, and which we should be grateful that murder cases have plummeted. But Bianchi was a very unreliable witness, and Buono almost got away with it, but thank goodness he didn't, because he ended up being convicted, serving life in prison. He died of a heart attack in 2002 at the age of 67. Many people feel he should have received the death penalty. But although California, has the death penalty on the books, it was very, very seldom used, so it probably wouldn't have made much difference in his case. Kenneth Bianchi is still in prison. He is serving a life sentence. He will never be released. I cannot see him being released on compassionate grounds. That would cause uproar. Even when he's on his deathbed, he will spend the rest of his days in prison, which is exactly where they should be. Because Darcy O'Brien paints a very, very vivid picture of these guys. It reads like a novel. We have a lot of dialogue sequences between them. I mean, dialogue sequences that go on, and we really get to see how sick they are. But of course, this is the mind of the psychopath and the mind of the psychotic. And psychopaths are very, very shallow people. They don't have much depth of personality. Don't expect, riveting conversation from them. So we get that, and it made me think when I was reading it. I think the research on offer here is very, very deep and profound, but there must be a certain degree of invention. I don't think anyone could replicate conversations that good. As much trial testimony and as much court transcripts that you'd have at your fingertips, there must be a certain degree of invention and linking. This being a famous LA murder as well, there is the brushing up against Hollywood. They actually came, the Hillside Stranglers, they came very, very close to murdering Peter Lorre's daughter, Catherine. They essentially accosted her, and they were going to pull the scam of arresting her. And then when they saw her ID, the name Lorre, they're like, "Are you Peter Lorre's daughter?" She was like, "Yes, I am." And they kind of looked at each other and said, "This isn't a very good idea," i.e., murdering a Hollywood princess is going to get us into trouble. So Catherine Lorre narrowly escaped death. That she was very, very lucky that night. Sadly, she only lived to be 35. She had a very troubled existence in many other ways. But this is a great LA book because although most of the time we're in the killer's viewpoints, which is kind of scary in itself, but you've got the lead detectives on the case. One's Irish, one's Italian. Then they're a good team. It's opposites attract. They're kind of fiery and feisty with each other. And you get really, really good and bizarre. But we read them today. Bizarre details. This is slightly before the age of I suppose it was in the infancy of the criminal profiler. But a fad that was going on with the police at the time was to hire a psychic and bring the psychic in and ask for their opinion. And the detectives on this case are like, that is just ridiculous. It's a common con. They hang around a case until they have enough information. They have the exact same information the detectives have, and then they draw a conclusion which the detectives are going to reach anyway. That's the con. There's even a film about this, a decent 70s noir called Man on the Swing with Cliff Robertson and Joel Grey. Bit rare, but track it down. It's worth your time. But ironically, they hired a psychic who flew in from Germany, and the psychic said two brothers, Italians, 35 years old, and he wasn't that far from the truth. It was actually withheld. It became known as the Hillside Strangler. The police knew early on that it was two of them, but they withheld that to root out false impressions. There was a very and a case like this would get hundreds, if not thousands, of false confessions, just as the Daily did. There was actually a down on the luck TV actor who confessed to the crimes. So, Two of a Kind it is a really good book. The second half of it falls into much of what happened with prior nonfiction novels, like famously Capote's In Cold Blood, and the absolute king of the nonfiction true crime novel, Joseph Wambaugh, rest in peace, Joe. Sorry, excuse me. Rest in peace, Joe passed away recently, but his classic novels like The Onion Field and the Blooding, he was the only one I felt who really, really mastered the genre. I could stick it out because why we didn't get as many of these as considering their popularity, we didn't get as many kind of nonfiction novels as we might have done, is they just take a long, long time to do. And the author is at the mercy of the justice system. And it's usually cases like this that drag on for years. It almost killed Capote. In fact, it probably did emotionally and intellectually kill Capote because he felt with being cold blood, he didn't have an ending until they were executed. And any death penalty case is it's going to get held up on appeal for years and might go all the way to the Supreme Court. So it's a fantastic book, and how it came on Ellroy's radar is that Ellroy was commissioned by Sean Ryan, the guy who did The Shield, to write a TV pilot about the Hillside Strangler task force. And he wrote the pilot. I was fortunate enough to read a copy. It was very, very good. Unfortunately, it wasn't filmed. It was called The Lead Sheet. I think in his head, it was around the time that Zodiac came out. And he got very, very, and Ellroy was bowled over by Zodiac. And I think it kind of, his work kind of conflated with a little bit with Zodiac in his mind. But it read very well. It would have been, a nice piece of television, but in typical Hollywood style. It didn't get made. He got paid, so Ellroy was like, oh, no big loss. And we were talking about the Hillside Strangler case and Ellroy's memories of it one day. And he mentioned how when he was writing the lead sheet, which was the name of the pilot, this was his Bible. He would go to it, time and time again, for information, for fact checking. But there was an interesting element of the case that I mentioned to Ellroy, and I kind of knocked him for six, which was Ellroy, from his teenage years right through to when he finally left LA in 1981, has left LA for the first time, moved to New York, and wouldn't return for 25 years, wouldn't return until after his second divorce. Ellroy had always spent a lot of time in libraries, Los Angeles Public Library, Hollywood Public Library. It partly stemmed from the fact that if he was homeless, if he was hard up, if he was unemployed, and of course, he was virtually orphaned, he was committing petty crimes and things like that. He was almost transient for some years. The libraries are a good place to go. They're free to get into. No one will ever judge you there. You've got peace and quiet. And he could indulge in his passion for reading crime novels, for reading true crime books. And I said to Ellroy, well, there's an element of this case that made me think of you, which was the Hillside Stranglers actually rang as Bianchi used a call box in the Hollywood Public Library in the foyer to ring an escort and lured her back to their apartment where they murdered her. That was Kimberly Martin. And I was like, did you ever think about that? Because, I said to her, do you ever think about that? Because you were in Hollywood Public Library all the time. And he's like, no. And he kind of looked at me, he's like, wow. It really, really dawned on him just how close he had come to maybe, brushing up, how easily he could have brushed up against one of these guys. Yet Bianchi was making the call while Angela Buena was hanging around the library stacks. It's described in this book very well, harassing women who are looking at books. That was his style. These guys fit in to LA, unfortunately, at the time very easily because of their kind of loose lifestyle. They were kind of like the extreme forms of the swinging lifestyle and the hot tub fever, and pre-AIDS, the very, very kind of promiscuous lifestyle that was that was prevalent at the time. Ellroy could have easily have run into them at a sex party or anything like that he was involved in. I'm not saying that, and I'm not trying to draw any kind of moral equivalence. I'm just trying to say how they fit in and how they were quite difficult to catch. Although their reign of terror was relatively short, but they killed 12 women in that time. really, really evil people. And Two of a Kind is one of the great true crime books. I feel like true crime is a genre because Netflix and Amazon have kind of maybe hammered it into the ground and are always looking for sensationalism and always looking for easy answers. But back in the day, the nonfiction novel, the epic true crime stories where the research was really, really tight and they would pour over all of the details from the police files and the court transcripts and everything. Darcy O'Brien was the master of that, and he died of a heart attack at only 58 years old. He'd just retired from his teaching post, and his last book, which was a book about the story of Pope Jean Paul and his lifelong friendship with a Jewish man, was published posthumously. And it's sad because I think he had a lot more books in him. But we do have what he created for us. And this is my Ellroy Reid recommendation of the week, Two of the Kind, the Hillside Stranglers. Okay, thanks very much. See you next time. Bye bye.